We'll be ready in just a second. Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ and Friends. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this week I'm broadcasting live from the True North Health Center, where I'm not only presenting, but also resting up before our big plant-powered party in Vegas next week. I am so honored to talk to today's guest. Her name is Dr. Theresa Burke, and let me just give you a little information as to why I'm having her on the show. This is the cool thing about having a YouTube show. It doesn't really matter if everybody sees it, just the right people. And I'm hoping the people that need this information will see today's show. So if you are following my lung cancer journey or familiar with my story, and if you want to follow me, then going to chefaj.com, I do a weekly update where I write from the heart what's going on with me. That I don't want every show to be about cancer, but every now and then, every few months, I have Dr. Matt Letterman come on the show. He's coming on this afternoon, actually, just to give you an update, recent scans, and this kind of thing. And we were talking, and he was saying, well, what treatments have you been exploring? And I said, well, I really didn't want conventional treatment, chemosurgery, and radiation. So I've been looking into alternative treatments at holistic hospitals, places in Mexico, Oriental medicine doctors. And whenever they asked my diagnosis, which is stage 3 lung cancer, the first thing they said was, oh, that's grief. And I'm like, why are all these people saying that? And they would say, well, what are you grieving? And I said, well, my dog Bailey died recently, but this was before. And I'm like, well, 25 years ago, I lost 4 babies, and 2 of them under quite horrific circumstances. And I never was allowed to grieve because in our society now, and even more so then, when your baby wasn't born, even though one of my pregnancy losses was like 2 days before a live birth, they call it a fetus, they call it cells, they don't ever call it a baby. But if you've ever been pregnant, from the minute you're pregnant, what's growing inside you is a baby. So I was talking about that on the show, and you would not believe how many viewers wrote into the help desk saying, you've got to go to Rachel's Vineyard Ministry. And I'm like, I never heard of it. Well, I do what I'm told, and I'm very thankful because I was lucky to find one that was in English, that wasn't too far from my home. And I went there in June, and it was one of the most profound experiences of my life. It actually changed my life. It opened the door for not just hope or healing from a 25-year wound. And, I wouldn't say, oh, I'm over it now, but it really was just a magnificent experience. And I really recommend it to anyone out there or to refer people that have had pregnancy losses, either through miscarriage or abortion for whatever reason, because it's a form of disenfranchised grief, kind of like when you lose your pet and people are like, it's just a dog, you can get another dog. Well, 25 years ago, when I lost my baby, Rachel, 2 days before she would have been born, I looked for mental health or support or group support. And it's like, well, we don't have anything for you because it wasn't a real baby. You can have another, you can adopt. And so it's wonderful to know now that there's a place that we can go, no matter how many years ago this happened to us, for hope and healing and peace. And today I have Dr. Theresa Burke on the show. She is the founder of this wonderful ministry, and she's here to talk about how she came to this work and how it can help people that are in the same boat as me, that have this disenfranchised grief from pregnancy loss that really isn't acknowledged by our society. Please welcome to the show, Dr. Burke. It's such an honor to meet you, and I thank you so much for what you created. It's such a beautiful experience.
It was great to hear from you about it and then talk a little bit last week. You're on quite a journey yourself, but I'm glad to be here to share about Rachel's Vineyard.
Yeah, so how did you get, you're a doctor, you're right, a PhD, I'm guessing, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So how did you get into this work?
Well, I was actually in graduate school and I was doing one of my very first field placements. That's before an internship. I was working on my master's degree at the time in counseling psychology, and my first assignment was with an eating disorder clinic. And so all of my or clients were anorexics and bulimics. And it was actually an impaired physician group. So they were mostly doctors struggling with eating disorders. And one of the people came, one of the women came into our group, and her arm was all bandaged up, and she just started sharing that her ex-husband would call and leave messages on her answering machine before cell phones, so her 3 kids would hear the message, and he would call her a murderer And this would drive her to despair and grief, and she would slit her arms. This had happened a couple times because he knew the wounds that would trigger her and just make her kind of nuts. And and so she's sharing that story, and another woman in the group said, "Your husband's a horrible man," and we all kind of nodded in agreement. And and then she said, "I had an abortion too, and it would just kill me if somebody kept reminding me about it." And then another woman stood up and she started cursing and swearing. And she said, "We have a right to control our bodies, and to hell with anybody that would try to make me feel guilty. Having an abortion is the best thing I ever did." And she cursed out anybody that would try to make her feel different. And then another lady got up and she ran out of the room. We could actually hear her car screeching out of the parking lot. And this was such a dramatic thing. And this, brand new in this group. This subject comes up. And of course, when you're a student, you have to tell everything that happened to your supervisor. And my supervisor was a psychiatrist. So I had to unpack the meeting and what happened. You have to take notes about it and whatnot. But later that night, I called the woman who left just to make sure she was okay. It was like a very abrupt way to leave a support group meeting. And she said, "I wish we could focus on eating disorders and not talk about abortion." And I said, "Did you have one too?" She said, "It was a long time ago and I don't want to talk about it." So what we have here is, in my mind, this was all the evidence of post-traumatic stress disorder. The fight, the girl who stood up, and her angry screaming and cursing actually shut down any meaningful dialogue that we could have had about women's real experiences after procedure or losing a child in any manner for that. And when I told my supervisor, he just said, he pointed his finger in my face and he said, "You have no business prying into people's abortions." And I said, "But I didn't pry in. Debbie brought it up. She's having nightmares and flashbacks. I think she has PTSD." And he told me that's a psychotic reaction caused by her medication. And FYI, if that is a psychotic reaction, you're supposed to get off the medication, not keep prescribing it, because that would be what we call an adverse reaction. And he just kind of forbid the subject. And I remember feeling kind of upset because I thought there's really something here that I wanted to learn more about. So that's actually the story that got me into it. There's many more stories that compelled me to stay into it because it wasn't what I was going to do. I was really interested in attachment disorder, and that happens when children can be separated from their parents or neglected in some way, that insecurity that develops, and any children with abuse in their history. And I ran a licensed children and youth agency at the time, so we were dealing with a lot of that, and I was placing older sibling groups and hard to place children with families. So I wanted to really help them know what to expect if a child has attachment disorder. But I think that in the long run, that this attachment injury can also happen to a mother, when she's separated from her child. So I know that the grieving, and this is my 40th year doing this. Rachel's Vineyard has spread to over 60 countries. It's in 37 languages, I think. It's all over the world. And it was spread by the people whose lives it changed, whose grieving it facilitated, and who were able to come to some kind of closure from the grieving, which we now have a diagnostic name that's brand new in the DSM-5. It's called prolonged grief disorder, because there really wasn't, other than saying that, they experienced trauma from the procedure, but this new diagnosis, prolonged grieving disorder, really does apply to many women who've suffered the loss of a child in a stillbirth, in a miscarriage, and certainly through a termination of their pregnancy. And there's many risk factors that puts a woman at risk for such trauma, but I don't think that we're really informed about that either. Because most people say, like you say, "Oh, you'll have another one." And yet the data and some of the research which we could look at a little bit today, is very compelling to show that this is not a simple thing that women just experience. What I think is, you talked about the disenfranchised grief, but I think what's even more of a of a picture is the secrecy surrounding it. 50% of women who are surveyed don't even tell their medical care provider. And women who have unresolved feelings of shame or guilt, these are usually the ones who are struggling after abortion. So that's 50% of women. And they've done research even on women in the military where they know what their medical records are because the military pays everything. And that's actually the best data that we get on this whole subject is really from countries with socialized medicine, because you can watch their reproductive history. You can do all kinds of analysis on the data of suicides after abortion, linking this and groups that have and haven't. So it's much more accurate, say, than a self-report measurement. It's women's medical records, right? So, and I know that I think your story was interesting when you said that everyone kept saying it's grief, that something, but I guess what we know about any illnesses and diseases, and I've certainly have a lot of experience with this in people from our ministry all over the world who suffer from a lot of autoimmune illnesses and things that come on where their body's attacking itself. And I do believe there's a psychological component in that. And the other interesting thing is that the brain processes emotional pain in the same place that it processes physical pain. So we also see a lot of pain syndromes develop afterwards, um, and fibromyalgia and these kinds of things, which are difficult anyway because you have to see like 10 doctors before you get a diagnosis. But internally, the person's saying something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong, but I don't know what. And there's other data that shows women making trips to the emergency room, and the same with their mothers who take them. So when these studies are so interesting, I have a lot of them in my book, Forbidden Grief, and then there's newer ones that are even more compelling these days because I wrote that a while ago. But it definitely looks at what happens when the loss isn't mourned. And then I go into great detail into something called traumatic reenactments, because we know that 50% of all abortions are repeat procedures. It was the data, it's coming down now, but I think it's not really coming down. But with medical abortions, the pill abortions, they don't really keep track of that data. You just get it and nobody's keeping track. So, but for a long time, it was 50% of everybody. So this is a lot of population that has the potential to suffer. And the kinds of things that I think are important are screening tools. And if there's some listeners that want to participate in those kinds of things, there's research going on where they help to create screening tools so that someone who is suffering is going to get the help that they need sooner rather than later, because it can lead to a lot of problems when you don't carry on with a treatment or
What I want to make sure the viewers understand that this Rachel's Vineyard retreat, this healing, it's not just for people that had abortion. If people have miscarriages too, we don't want to forget them. That was my case for children. And the thing I don't understand, Dr. Burke, is why, other than your weekend, are there no systems in place for people to deal with grief for these losses? Because the thing about a stillborn baby, of course, is extremely traumatic, but they have a body. And when you have a body, you can actually have a funeral. But when you have pregnancy loss, whether it's through an abortion or a miscarriage, they don't give it to you. You know what I'm saying? Like they don't say, oh, all of mine required operations, multiple operations, to I don't know what the word is I don't want to say get rid of it, but they have to remove it. When the baby's dead inside you can't leave it in there, right? And they don't give it to you. And so you have nothing, when your pet dies, they give you the ashes in a beautiful urn, and you could have some kind of ceremony. And for me, I think the most extraordinary part of the weekend, the whole weekend was incredible, but the memorial service and like our husbands could come to that. And not all the men came, but some men did. And just the tenderness and I mean, just to be able to like have people around you that not just acknowledge your loss, but that shared the same type of loss, and that for everybody in that room, and there was, I think the therapist to participant ratio was like either 1 to 1 or 2 to 1, like everybody like understood. And it's because it's the first, it was validation after 25 years that like, no, these actually were my children.
Yeah, well, it's that opportunity to grieve the loss. And that's where I feel that someone's heritage, their background, even their nationality, everybody throughout the world, because our program's all over the world, there's rituals that we use to facilitate grief, the lighting of candles, the pouring of water. So I consider Rachel's Vineyard as a sensory-based treatment because trauma comes up to us through our senses, through our feelings, our felt sense, the broken heart, all of that. So sometimes it's very hard to put words to that level of grief. As Shakespeare says, give sorrow words, because it's hard to like get it out. So Rachel's Vineyard uses a lot of somatic techniques and a lot of just beautiful imagery that we go into and different meditations where where we're experiencing healing and where we can honor that child, honor the life for however long it was within you, and just that the reverence for the loss of life. Like we apply that to just about every other thing, even for strangers on other side of the world. But when it comes to this personal, intimate, very profound, connected relationship with one's child, it's like supposed to mean nothing. Um, and I think that's part of the trauma again, is not having a place for that. Um, I had another experience and another supervision that was kind of interesting because one of the things I, I had started Rachel's Vineyard, so I was already doing this work, and for my dissertation, I wanted to study the bonding. I'm sorry, the letdown reflex of nursing mothers, because I had a loss myself, a miscarriage that happened late in my term, 6 months into it, and so I was aware of that. And then I was also aware of, the grieving that people in my groups were doing. This was before I started the retreats. And I told my supervisor of my project I wanted to study, and she told me that she had to stop supervising me and that she wouldn't approve this. And she said that all her colleagues felt the same way. And she said, I think that C. Everett Koop, who was the United States Surgeon General at the time, knows more about post-abortion trauma than you, and he says it doesn't exist. And actually, what the Surgeon General said was that the available data was flawed, and that he recommended that millions of government dollars be put into researching this common elective procedure. So that never happened to this day. That's never happened because it's so politicized. And I think the politics also interfere with women and men getting the healing that they need, because men do grieve too. They grieve, and many men don't have a say in what happens because it's a woman. And we even hear that it's a carefully it's a carefully made decision between a woman and her healthcare provider and her God. And that leaves out the man, who's a big contributor in this. So there are men who have some profound reactions. Other men force them, and it's a sad reality that number one cause of death during pregnancy is murder. I don't know if you knew that or not, but it's a really compelling statistic, and another reason to make sure that women aren't being coerced into abortions as a result of that.
Um, I still want to know though, why is there no systems in place for people in the regular world? Why the medical profession? I remember asking, can I see a therapist? I mean, yes, you can always see a therapist, but there was nobody like you that was specifically trained in pregnancy loss from miscarriage. There were just regular therapists and, doing CBT or whatever. But why does society not acknowledge these as profound losses? That's my biggest question.
Yeah,
Is
I mentioned I think that it's very politicized. So if abortion's healthcare, how can it hurt, right? If you do this decision that's supposed to make your life better, what do you do with feelings when it doesn't feel that way and no one's talking about it? No one's really bringing attention to the fact that there's tremendous grief and heartache over the loss.
it,
And
But it's the
that's
same for miscarriage. I mean, people. I mean, I'm not shaming or blaming people that have abortions, but generally they've chosen that. You don't necessarily, miscarriages just happen. I mean,
right, right.
you don't generally don't choose to have them, and yet they're just they say they're sorry, but there doesn't seem to be anything other than I know of that your weekend that helps people heal the loss. And I'm really curious the way the weekend is constructed. It's a busy weekend, by the way, and what's really cool about it is you make it so affordable. I mean, you have them at, I don't know where all of them are, but the one that I went to was in the most beautiful like location. Fort Healing was just beautiful retreat center in Auburn, California, with trees and just beauty everywhere. Like if you're going to heal, that's the place to go, you know?
Yeah, I think it's got to be in a beautiful setting because it's not a I don't even the therapy model and this is part of what creates no resources. And there's been a lot more resources. When I started, there was nothing that I knew of. And now there are different places you could look up post-abortion healing and probably find a number of other resources. But I know Rachel's Vineyard is the biggest one. I've been at it a long time. Um, and I think that when you have suffered a loss and haven't processed it and you're a therapist, it's going to be very hard for you to want to, go through that experience with somebody else or give permission for grieving. And that's one problem. If you've encouraged somebody to have have that, it's almost like you can't acknowledge any other baby because so many women have lost babies, maybe the same time someone else has a miscarriage. So because of all the unreconciled and unresolved grief, and that's what I'll call it, unresolved grief, it makes it very difficult to talk about. And I think that counselors, if they've encouraged someone in the past to have one and they come back and say they have problems, they're going to say that's from something else. Maybe you had sexual abuse. And I know a lot of people that happened to. I also know people who can be hospitalized with an anniversary reaction and sometimes a nervous breakdown on the anniversary date that their child would have been born or the date that the child was lost. But when they go in the hospital, they're not allowed to talk about this. I'm talking about psychiatric hospitals. Many women have told me I couldn't even talk about it every year because they would have like that anniversary reaction that could land them into a very, very bad depression or feeling like, you know, feeling feeling really anxious and even sometimes suicidal. So that's what would bring on an inpatient. And there's some interesting data about that, even with women with miscarriages, how many go into depression. The numbers are higher than we think. And so I think this idea for screening and then giving people resources is the push. There's an organization out in California, which I put in the show notes near the end. It's the Institute for Reproductive Loss, and they're educating hospitals. And I've done the same with hospitals. And when I'm giving my seminar in a hospital, you know who comes to me at the end are all the nurses who work in hospice, and they say this issue is front and center when someone is in hospice care. Because before they might have been fine their whole life, but before they face death, it's something they want to find some peace about. And that's the interesting thing about folks who seem to tolerate the procedure or the loss, or maybe even if you had a miscarriage, and then it's like years later when you see a child that's the age your child would have been, these can be triggers. So the triggers of trauma are all around. And it's it's such a natural part of a woman's life, and the statistics of the number of losses you can have, it's not some women have many, others are lucky not to experience that, but it can be devastating, especially when a child was planned and wanted, or you're going through the fertility. And we don't talk enough about the fertility grief, goodness. All this stuff is like some kind of secret. And I often thought about like Oprah Winfrey, how there isn't one subject that she didn't talk about, like any taboo subject. But for some reason, this loss in women's reproductive lives is sort of taboo when everything else. And in the eating disorder group, I thought to myself, it's not what you're eating, it's what's eating you, you know, because all those girls in our group had this, loss, and not one of them could talk about it without all the arousal. And that's where we really have to be sensitive, and gentle. And that's why I love Rachel's Vineyard. I think it's very gentle, it's very beautiful, it's reverent. Because
So that's the,
people,
it's very, it's like a warm hug. I mean, they made us, the volunteers made us all handmade, crochet these beautiful shawls to wear that weekend. It was so personal and personalized, and just everything was done with love. I mean, the people that come, and they're volunteers, they're not even getting paid. These are like therapists, right? For example, and and the clergy that were there. I mean, I've never been like so loved really in this group. And what I thought was really interesting is I'm kind of getting up there. I'm 65. And I figured, oh God, I'm going to, it was going to be a bunch of young women. It wasn't. There was really only a couple of women that were younger. There were people that had carried this burden much longer than I have, much older women. And so I guess the message I want to impart is it's never too late for healing.
yeah, and I just want to share that there's um, Rachel's Vineyard retreats that use the program with some adaptation for people with miscarriages, and that depending on the site leader, not every some just have it for terminations, and then we know there's sometimes up to a 200% increase in miscarriages after that procedure. So we honor all the losses of the womb, and that's where there's a bit of a crossover, but our only caveat is that for those that have suffered the loss but through termination, that they wouldn't feel judged by some woman who would come in and say, well, I would never do that because it doesn't feel safe. Do you know what I mean? So the facilitators may do they'll advertise if it's for that, or you can call and ask, would you accept me? Because many do. And some of the leaders got into it because of their miscarriage loss, and they had not been able to grieve either. So it was just like something that their heart went out for, how much that would hurt, a mom, a family, sometimes the siblings. So
How did you like devise the program though, the structure? Because it's very well done. And and I was worried like, oh, I'm going to be bored. I'm going to watch a bunch of it wasn't. It was really an interesting and very, what's the word? Participatory. Like, like you didn't just sit there and listen the whole time. You did things.
well, I would say that I was ahead of my time in terms of trauma sensitive care, only because I studied theater before I went into psychology. I was getting a master's in theater, and it was actually method acting and all that talked about props, so that because they were trying to help people on stage to not only be good actors, but to be able to draw on emotional memory so that they could evoke real feelings so they're not sitting there being fake about it. So um, having some of the symbols that we have, and we do it in a faith context. And I'm Catholic, but we have it in interdenominational settings and Catholic settings, and then we adapt the program for people who would come from different religions so that they can use the rituals and their heritage to honor their child with something that would feel like it's very familiar to them. For example, in the Hindu faith, they do a lot of this washing of the body. So, the stones we have that you carry around, they wash those stones and then they covered them with the gauze bandages from the Lazarus exercise. And I know I'm saying stuff that doesn't make sense, but we act out these places where God is healing people. And so Lazarus, they name the parts of themselves that have died, in their heartbreak. And then they wrap those parts. And a lot of people find this very cathartic because you're making visible the invisible wounds that you carry that nobody sees. That's the remarkable thing, I think, when you're on a program on one of the retreats and you just hear what everybody's been going through, but some of them look like they're worn and others look perfect and they function perfect. And they'll say that it's the first time they've ever told this story to anybody. Nobody in the world knows. So you're keeping the burden of that secret without any support whatsoever for years and years. And I think that you get diminished because one part of your heart has to shut down to keep functioning, and then many other parts also shut down. And what I love about healing is that people have a visceral experience of their child's spirit, and they feel the child's at peace. And I think that in any traumatic loss of a child, whether that's what a mother needs to know, where is my child and are they safe? Even if they're lost or missing, you just want to know, are they okay? And so I think Rachel's Vineyard does a beautiful job of helping the person have an experience of their child as at peace and loving them and forgiving them and whatever moral injury they suffered. And I think we talked last week about moral injury, you and I, and it's very similar to the moral injury of combat soldiers, where there's a betrayal of authority, where someone told them you have to do this thing, or you know, um, where they feel betrayed. Sometimes it's from the person telling them to do it or forcing them to do it, coercing them in some way. 65% of women who were studied out of a very large cohort felt that there was pressure on them to make that decision. And this brings up the subject of perinatal hospice, which is really relevant to those folks that you in your audience who may know or be somebody uh, who has a poor prenatal diagnosis. So you know that the life of the child is not really viable, or there's some threat to the life. So perinatal hospice, and this is in the show notes too, if anybody knows someone in this situation, please tell them, because it's just another choice that many are not given. Like you were saying, help for the loss, grief, but help for how do I cope with this bad news when all my dreams and hopes were looking forward to having this child, and now there's a problem. So perinatal hospice really embraces the whole family and the baby as a patient, a hospice patient. And so they're supported to go through that process where they can give birth. They have all the support they need. They are really swaddled in a lot of love and a lot of good information. If they have a Down's child or something else, they're put in touch with other parents so that they can know it might not be the end of the world. There's just time to reflect, to decide what are our values as a family, as a couple, what do we need to do to make the best decision for ourselves. And those that engage with perinatal hospice just don't have the trauma, the depression, all the postpartum, the complications with later babies, because they're able to resolve in the love that they give, whether it's a few hours or a few days or a few weeks. And then the family comes and everyone holds that baby and everyone's there with you when you're going through that loss. So you can grieve together, you have a body to mourn, you have footprints and fingerprints in the baby blanket. And these little mementos are for a memory box, but they, like you were saying, they validate your reality that this is a loss. But when there isn't that time for everyone to surround you and there's no ritual for it, well, then you're left alone in your suffering. And then I think it gets worse. We have to give our feelings and our heart attention so it can heal and validate the reality of the pain that was, and then um, come to peace with it. Because the other thing is that when you don't do that, it makes later children, you can be very ambivalent in the pregnancy itself, you know, fear. That's what happened to me after I lost a baby 6 months in. I felt like I was afraid to attach to that baby because what's going to happen if she dies, right? And there's all kinds of feelings that we go through that, and even with miscarriage, people will blame themselves. I had two earlier ones before that, but I remember thinking, oh, I shouldn't have painted that room. I was probably smelling those fumes. I was, you just like women are famous for blaming ourselves for everything, and I just feel like this is a huge, huge issue for women. And when it all becomes about women not wanting to be mothers, I feel like that's where we see the wound. When even the Nations wants to get rid of the word mother from, humanity's dictionary, because it's like we don't want to be this. Instead of embracing our femininity, our capacity to reproduce, our grief when it doesn't happen, it doesn't mean you're any less human or that you're not a successful, intelligent person. It's I think that innately we're we're wired for this and we're gifted at it. And even if you're not a parent, you find ways to to exercise mothering, teaching people to cook. There's nothing more motherly than that.
Absolutely. One thing I hope is you will put your book on Audible as soon as possible because I'm not much of a reader these days with one of the
Oh,
medications I'm on with my vision being blurry, but I really hope you will put your book on Audible. And we have some wonderful questions in the chat from our live audience. And this one from Vi. So much guilt and shame surrounding these losses too. How does one resolve or live with those feelings?
well, I'm a, I use this word honor your feelings, but that just means take them seriously. Your pain matters. And you just want to know your worth and listen to your spirit, because it's when we negate what our heart's telling us or our spirit's telling us, or you feel that sadness and you feel like you got to buck up and get on and move on and forget about it and be tough. Like, why? Because we don't heal and we harden. If we don't allow our hearts to grieve, they harden. And then we can't love ourselves sometimes, and we can't at other times love others who might need to feel us, because that's the hardening. And I think that feminism, as much as I I feel like I'm a working mom, I always have been, probably always will be, even as a grandma. Um, but I just feel like there's guilt put on women for the choices they make in parenting or trying to do it. And now our economy doesn't even allow it. Almost, you almost have to work, right? And if you don't, you're it's really hard to get by when things are this and mortgages are high. Like it's just kind of hard. But I would love to see the world made um, more accommodating to women. I'd love to see flex time in the workplace. There's like so many changes we could make if we were really advancing as women than just making everybody feel like you know, you're doing something bad by having a baby sometimes.
Yeah. So one of the questions I had for you when we met last week, and I usually don't meet with people before the show, I like it to be live and spontaneous, but I thought I was doing really great and had processed a lot and experienced a lot of healing. And then one day, a few weeks ago in my kitchen, I had asked Alexa to play a song. And she, as she does many times, she played the wrong song. And the song that came on, which I had played for you when we met, it's called We Almost Had a Daughter. It's a new song, and I can link to it in the show notes. I don't know the artist. He's a new artist to me, but I think it was basically like the theme songs to Rachel's Vineyard about a child who never got born. And I just started bawling my eyes out. And I thought, to my husband, I thought I was not over this, but I thought I was better. And my question to you is like that weekend, you're not going to keep doing it every time, but what healing can be offered to people like that goes deeper after that weekend? Because when I think about losing a baby, whether it's from stillborn, whether it's miscarriage or abortion, I put them all together in that, to me, they're all very traumatic. And I feel like there's a lot of trauma in pregnancy loss. And then that's not talked about, how just the fact of losing a baby anyway is
That's
traumatic.
right.
Yeah.
Including adoption.
Yeah, or like, I mean, I had a lot of fertility treatments that didn't work. I mean, it's
Yeah.
all traumatic. Or I have friends that, they've had fertility treatments, and in order for some of the babies to survive, they had to, I,
Reduction. Yeah.
I don't like any of those words, but if any of the babies were going to survive, some were going to have to not survive. And that's traumatic, you know?
Sure it is. You're right. We're swimming kind of in a sea of unrecognized women's trauma here. And and I do think that there can't be enough not only awareness but resources out there. So, and your song was beautiful because you did play that for me. And one of the things that the woman just asked, what was her name that just wrote in?
A vi.
Bye. So I think that through art, people can really grieve and honor drawing pictures, writing songs if they're musical, poetry to the child. We've heard the most beautiful lullabies that people will write and sing to their babies at the memorial service. But I just think, I think through the arts, because the art is right-brained, and that's also where a lot of the rituals and the creative meditations, like anything that's engaging your right brain, which is not the reason brain, it's more imaginative, creative, artistic, that really helps with trauma. And however they would want to express, we used to have everybody make a quilt square, and then we would put them all together for this blanket of love, all the women from the retreat, and we just had quilt after quilt and messages to their children. I think memorializing the child through something artistic. Some people like to plant like a rose bush or a garden or something. And especially when you lose a child, and there's other children in the family, like how does a baby, toddlers or younger children understand that loss? One day his mommy's pregnant and next she's not coming home with a baby. And there's need for, kind of ministry for the whole family many times. And I know that Rachel's Vineyard allows grandparents to come grieve. Maybe they've told their daughter to have it and they watch her change and be sad and depressed and angry. Um, or maybe they didn't know and they would have done anything to have that child accepted. Maybe a lot of grandparents find out later and they just feel terrible that they didn't know about it because they would have welcomed. And how many people are afraid of parents' reactions when they're in that situation? But having a baby in itself can be self-healing, and the family always comes around to love, and that's the shining star. We all know stories of that, you know.
Yeah. That so what's the next step? I mean, I know you have other programs, and I'm very much considering taking the next one, From Grief to Grace, which isn't specifically focused on pregnancy loss. But what is the next step to healing after somebody has done the Rachel's Vineyard Ministry weekend?
A lot of people, honestly, they start sites. This is how it's spread all over the world because they want to help others. Many want to help others because that, when you're really going to get on the other side of the grieving, and that doesn't happen right away. First, you grieve, you memorialize, you talk about it, you get a coalition of support, you dismantle the secret so that it's not a secret and you can talk about it, you can cry about it with people that are close to you, people that were there or didn't know. So that's all. But when you're transforming it, it's finding meaning. Like any traumatic situation, if you can't find meaning in it, I think you can become stuck in it sometimes. And the meaning happens when a lot of people honor their child through whatever work they feel called to, whatever volunteer wherever they want to volunteer any extra time. So a lot of people have started their own Rachel's Vineyard site. They honor their baby through that. And they feel like if I can help one person, that it's their child that's helping because they have a sense of their child's person, a spiritual person, um, like we would for any member of our family who's died. Like we can we can pray to them, we can know that they're in a better place and that they love us. So it's restoring the love for yourself, for the baby, and for a lot of people, their spiritual beliefs, because many people feel like why did God let this happen? They're either angry or they feel like they feel guilt. And we don't hear people talk a lot about that, but I, I the most successful people all over the world who've hit it well just have a lot of heartbreak and a lot of feelings of, because again, that's the secret has to be dismantled, or you feel like you're the only one, or you feel like you're crazy because you don't know of anybody else who's bothered by this, right? Because we don't talk about it. So how do you know that, oh, what's wrong with me? Something's wrong with me. But there's nothing wrong with you. It's a natural reaction to um, an abnormal event.
There, thank you for saying that. There's a really good question, many good questions in the chat, but one of them is about talking to men who have experienced the loss. Hold on, where I lost the question. Where did it go? How, what would you say to men who lose babies without a say-so? Leviticus is asking.
Well, I would say that they have a right to heal and they're welcome to Rachel's Vineyard because we do have a lot of men who come and that it's a I think that there's a very natural trauma because men are instinctively programmed hopefully to protect and provide for, to protect. And I know that not every woman wants a guy protecting her, but it's something that they're built to do, and they're stronger, and that there's a violation of their sense of self. And uh, plenty of men might have been oblivious to their feelings until they have their own children. And I remember one man that I treated, he said his wife didn't know he had an abortion because you don't even tell your spouse, right? And that every night when he would go in and he would kiss his kids goodnight, he had three little kids, he would bend over the bed and kiss them. And he said he would just grieve and grieve and grieve as he remembered the one he lost. Like knowing how precious those children are and then thinking later. So sometimes it hits you later. That's why we call it post-traumatic stress. But my husband did a lot of work interviewing people in prison, and he wrote a book called Tears of the Fisherman. I think that's about men and abortion. And I think there's a link to that, or you can call our office to get it. It's not on Amazon right now, but we could get it to somebody if they wanted to read this. And there are more books about men. Um, there was a social worker who studied men, and he was totally thought there was nothing wrong with it, but he was very surprised at all the depression that he suffered afterwards. And so he did a whole study on it. It's called Shostak study, and it was published about men's reactions. And men grieve differently than women, and our bereavement patterns are different. Men actually like sex when they're grieving, and women are turned off by it. As a research study, that was the findings. Not that everyone falls into that, like research, but it's just interesting. So there's ways they miss. We love when couples come, and we've also had couples come. We don't recommend you go back to your old boyfriend if you're married, but you bring your husband or your wife. And in the retreat, when they're honoring the baby, that that spouse is invited to get up and spiritually adopt that child and make it a member of his household, because if she had the baby, he would have loved her just as much, when there's love like that. And I think that's a beautiful thing for men to do is go, grieve either by themselves or with their partner and heal.
Thank you. Susanna would like to know what are some of the somatic exercises that are done at the weekend?
Well, somatic means without words, so this would be the grieving exercises. Sometimes, well, I was talking about my background in theater, and I probably didn't go thoroughly into it, but we like to work with painful positions where you feel stuck, and then the group comes over and they move one, everybody would surround you. Like one woman had, she was 9 months pregnant when she came on the retreat. Her mother came with her. She was about to give birth any day. And normally, a pregnant woman on a post-abortion retreat could trigger someone, or even for people who never had, just seeing that big belly in front of you could be like, ugh. So we always deal with that in the beginning. So if someone's having that reaction, we we would just let her stand up there. And you give it attention, it loses its power. But to ignore the elephant in the room, as it were, with any problem, no matter what it is, anxiety, this is where we use the somatic exercises so that the person can be tended to with the support of the group. And it was very natural because she just stood there, and then her mother came up and stood next to her, and everyone was allowed to put themselves in the picture. And the men came forward and they made like a wall of protection around her. And then the other people came down, they knelt by her side, they put their head up to her stomach. And these are women that would have felt like, oh, like they had an aversive reaction because it's a trigger. But we invite them to explore the trigger slowly and with reverence, to do whatever they want to do, whatever they feel compelled to do. And no one's giving them directions. They do whatever they want. You could sit there if you want, but everyone came up and they got so close and they were touching her belly, like the way you can, some women do in the store when you're shopping. Oh, if they've sometimes seeing a pregnant woman can evoke many things depending on what your experience has been. But I thought this was a beautiful thing because there was no issue after that, and everyone had overcome their phobia of pregnant women just by being able to explore that and talk about it when we were done, and the good feeling that they felt.
So just so people know, there's no men, at least there were no men at my retreat, other than there was a priest there, but all the therapists and all the participants were women. So you do have separate women weekends for men and separate weekends for women, correct?
There's men's ministries for men just alone, and Rachel's Vineyard, depending on the site, you could call and ask, are there going to be men there? Because most of the time it's a lot of women, but sites that are couple-led, where there's men and women on the team, um, then you're going to find more. But what we found is that people who come in hating men, and this is across the board, I don't think anyone out there from Rachel's Vineyard would disagree with me, and they're sometimes surprised, um, that it it mends the war between the sexes, if I could say that, because a lot of women are shocked and surprised that a man could cry because she has this assumption that he doesn't give a crap, right? And so they find to see that they grieve sometimes harder than the women, which they can't believe. It's a healing experience for them. And that's the bottom line. So, but that's why we allowed them, because we saw that it is a healing experience. And then when you can come with your spouse or, somebody close to you that's gonna understand this wound and go through it with you, then you have a lifetime of support, right? So that if you get pregnant later and it's a little triggering, or you have anxiety, or you're worried, there's somebody who understands. I think when people go into relationships hiding this, and I think it's harder. There's actually a movie out right now. Someone from Italy just wrote to me about it. I didn't see it yet, but I think it's called Sorry Baby. She said it's very beautiful. She runs Rachel's Vineyard in Italy. I don't know if anyone's heard of that. I didn't get to see it, but
I'll Google it while you're answering this question. How many countries in the world and how many cities in the United States do Rachel Ministry Vineyard weekends take place, and how often do they take place? Because everything is in the show notes. Everything you wrote me, all the clickable links are in the show notes if they want more information.
there's hundreds of retreats a year all over the world. We are in 60 countries. We're in 37 languages, I think I said at the beginning. And we've been in 49 states. We lost a few states along the way because people that were running it passed away or moved. But I think we're in almost 50 states. So it's pretty much all over the place.
Thank you. Here's a question from Renee. She said that she lost a brother, a baby, when he was 3 days old, but she didn't know this till much later on. Her family was told, "Is there a place for her to go to process grief?" But if it's like a sibling, not necessarily a baby that you lost.
I I think that there's places to honor a child that's been lost in the family. I think I put some in the show notes at the very end because it wasn't like anything I'm involved in, but it was things that we know about. Like there's one that does retreats for families.
Great, thank you. Okay,
And something else I've heard about is when people have a twin that's lost and they feel that separation because they were together and maybe one of the twins dies in utero, and they have a grief response that they might not have understood till their mom tells them.
mm, nice. So tell us about the other retreat that you're doing called Grief to Grace that I'm very seriously considering doing, which is next month. It's a week-long retreat instead of a weekend. Who is eligible for that, and what happens at that retreat?
Grief to Grace is for healing the wounds of abuse. So we have um, emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and neglect. Because when a child experiences neglect in the literature, it's extremely damaging. People don't think of that because they think sexual abuse has to be worse, but sexual abuse is in the context of a relationship with a human being. And I'm not saying it's a good thing at all. I'm just saying that when someone isn't even touched, when they're completely left alone, when they're neglected, that it's profoundly, it creates a lot of complex PTSD as well. So, and all kinds of problems. So grief to grace is for abuse. We also deal with spiritual abuse and abuse from a religious leader, clergy abuse, all kinds of abuses, domestic violence, and then other traumatic things. People have come, we don't let anyone, even if there's a therapist that wants to help or do something, we make everyone go through the retreat as a participant first to grieve whatever, because I think the one who hasn't done grief work is the most dangerous person in the room. And I think that's kind of what I was indicating when I said if a therapist hasn't dealt with their own pregnancy loss, they're not gonna let you talk about it, right? And and I think it gives a sensitivity to understand how hard it is when you're doing what we call the soul work. We call it very, very deep soul work. These retreats are all a therapy for the soul because we incorporate psychological, spiritual, body, mind, spirit, and any any injury that's come in your relationship with the higher power, because that helps us get through a lot of things, and people lose that when they feel betrayed or that God doesn't care. And we also try to help answer that question. Why did he let this happen? Where was he? Why didn't he do something? Like anything bad, even illness that people are struggling with. Why?
Yeah. Well, I just want to say the retreat that I went to took place at the Sisters of Mercy, a Catholic organization, and I'm Jewish, and I was not offended. I mean, meaning like you don't have to be the religion of the place it takes place. You're still welcomed. You know what I mean? I want people to know that.
Yeah, and nobody's trying to convert you to anything. It's an experience. That's what's different. There's no preaching, there's no teaching. It's an experience of of connecting with other people and grieving, and then an experience of who God is, who would mourn with, who says, blessed are those who mourn, who's grieving with you. In Grief to Grace, he was a fellow abuse victim, right? If Christ, I'm talking about. So it's like experiences of healing in the context of scriptures that we bring to life and we act out. We call them living scriptures, meaning we enter the story. So how do we act it out? This is one example. There's a scripture of a blind man, and he's heard about all the healings, and but all the lights are out. We're in darkness, and you are imagining that you're the blind man. And then we act it out because the pastor or whoever the religious leader is would come and say, take facilitator would say, take courage, AJ, he's calling you. And you'd say, Jesus, son of David, have pity on me. And then he would say, what do you want me to do for you? And then you answer out loud. And I've had a psychiatrist with me on a retreat once, and he said he's never seen in the first exercise people bond and be so honest, like right away, because we take out the middleman and people feel their spirit and they're invited to speak what they want. And all the miracles that God always said it's your faith that saved you. So each thing is an invitation to reach out in faith, because God will never invade our boundaries. He's gonna respect whether we want him there or not. And I think when people are hurting or they have moral injury, spiritual injury, this is where we must go, is to reconcile that wound with ourself, first of all. And a lot of people say they know God forgives, but they can't forgive themselves for whatever reason. And that's what we really specialize in, is helping them get a sense of their goodness. Um,
And
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 yeah,
and if there's anything that makes someone uncomfortable, no one is forced to do anything, and that's what
no,
I want
no, it's all an invitation. And even if you, because I always say no one's here to convert you. Even if, like you said, you're Jewish. Well, he was your Jewish brother, so, or prophet, however you want to see, not your king, but
I thought I might be uncomfortable, but I wasn't. It was a beautiful. We just
yeah.
have to for a couple more questions, so I'd like to get to them. Drew says, "What do you say to the person who says it's God's will after a miscarriage?"
Oh my gosh. That's a good question.
I would say, well, yeah, but it wasn't mine. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that saying it's God's will kind of negates anything real about their pain, as if to say it doesn't matter because somebody else wanted this for you. You know,
Yeah.
I feel like it totally negates. I wouldn't find that to be a safe person to go up to any more than I would from somebody who gives platitudes of, oh, well, you're such a strong person, you can handle it. Or, all the things that we hear that we say, don't ever say to somebody that's grieving,
And they always do. It's so funny. It's just like
or
I,
he
I'm
won't give you more than you can handle. Well, quite frankly, many people are completely crushed by this and want
right.
to die.
And
So it's,
I think not everyone means to I think a lot of times people mean well and they just don't know what to say because I'm doing a whole comedy but and what not to say to people with cancer. I think sometimes people just don't know what to say and they stumble, so they say things that are insensitive without meaning sometimes.
yeah, I don't think they mean it, but it's very hard when your skin is already paper thin to have to deal with that when you just want maybe a hug or you want someone to
Just
say,
say I'm sorry. You know what? Here's the thing, guys. When you don't know what to say to somebody, whether they have cancer, they'll just say, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. That's like, isn't that the best thing? I'm
yeah,
sorry.
it is. Yeah.
It's just keep it simple. This
Or
is
that must be so hard.
yeah, yeah.
I can't imagine what that must be like for you, but
Yeah, or when they say, "Oh, yeah, you're going to be fine." It's like, well, do you really know that? But anyway, I'm turning it
yeah,
all. I'm spinning it all into a comedy act that I'm doing in Vegas. So, anyway,
I gotta see that.
I'll get you. I will get the link.
Oh my gosh.
Giovanna says, "Is there such a thing as grief for a baby you didn't have, not by choice, but just because it never happened and you never got pregnant?" That's a really interesting question.
You know what? I call that grieving the child of your heart.
Mm.
That means that, I always thought I'd be a mother and never happened, and I never met the right guy, or I didn't, but whatever it is, because that's the innate, we're life givers, and we're caregivers too. And the child of your heart is the one that you would have longed to love and to hold and to raise and to share life with and have fun adventures with. That's a lifetime of grieving because it seems that everyone else around has all that
Mm.
and someone to take care of you in your old age. So there's a lot of anxieties around that as life goes on, and it's a real thing. So I call it grieving the child of your heart, and you would be welcome on Rachel's Vineyard if you wanted to go honor those feelings and that loss.
You're just that's beautiful. Thank you. And why is it called Rachel's Vineyard? Because the thing that really blew my mind when people told me to go was the name, because that was my baby's name. And
Yes.
I guess this was divine intervention because I had never heard of it. And it's like, well, I'm going. I didn't even really look into it. It just sounded wonderful and it was. But why is it called Rachel's Ministry?
It comes from the book of Jeremiah from the Old Testament. Rachel mourns her children and refuses to be consoled because her children are no more. Thus says the Lord, cease your cries of mourning and weeping. The sorrow you have shown shall have its reward. There is hope for your future. That's the Rachel part. The vineyard part, um, that came from, this is a funny story, but I'm not the kind of person that even knows every scripture in the Bible. I'm a person of deep faith, but I'm not like a Bible scholar of any kind. But I was trying to decide if I should get married. And this is the only other time I use this, where you open the Bible and say, Lord, tell me what to do. This is the only other time I used it, when I was going to get married. And I open up and I'm led to, it's better to marry than to burn. So I'm like, okay, I'm getting married. And,
That's funny.
and then the other one was when I wanted to name this program. And I was like, I don't know what to do, because I presented it to a bunch of therapists, and everybody was kind of like, I would never use that. Like, and they didn't want anything that had a faith component. So it was kind of like a big downer because I was so excited to share it. And it was like a boo, we wouldn't use this. And so I went home and I hadn't even named it. I was just presenting like some of the things that I was doing. And I opened the Bible and it said, I'm the vine, you are the branches. Unless you remain in me and I in you, you will bear no fruit. So I was like, that's it. I'm not going to apologize and I'm gonna, I'm gonna let Jesus stay in there.
Well,
You know?
thank you so much for the work and for the, oh, where am I? Am I here? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
I can hear you.
I seem to have disappeared, but that's okay. Thank you so much for the work in the program and for making it so affordable. I mean, it's basic and you get all your meals, you get a place to stay. It's all inclusive.
And I believe many sites have scholarships if somebody can't afford it.
Wow. That's fantastic. So I have a question. And this part of the weekend to me was like one of the most profound, the rock. The rock. Maybe you can talk about that because I thought I'm picking up this rock and it's going to stay with me forever. I feel like people even in other situations in life could benefit from that.
Yeah, the rock is we have a meditation. Is actually the woman caught in adultery, and it was more about how the woman's the one being punished for man's immorality because they didn't bother stoning the man. It was just the woman. And so it's like a reflection on that. But you're invited to enter the story where you're going to be stoned. And then Jesus is like, says, is there anyone here to condemn you? And she says, no, no one, because he made everybody go away and it was just the two of them. So the whole idea was that you have this personal encounter with God who says, I love you. And he says, I don't condemn you. And then she has this experience that's all in the meditation of being liberated from what she thought was the brink of death and being given a new life. So it's kind of a metaphor for her healing. And then at the end of that, everyone takes a rock and they carry it around and they're supposed to reflect on, you know, what the rock represents. It's an obstacle, it's a burden, and in relationship to their need for forgiveness. And one of the interesting things is that a lot of people say you carry it for 24 hours and you could put it down whenever you want as soon as you know what it means and you said I'm ready, let go of it. But people will grab that biggest, heaviest rock and they'll carry it around and they'll feel sorry for somebody else carrying it, but they want the big one, and a lot how I understand this is that the rock is their inability to forgive themselves. And part of that is also the fear of forgetting their child. So the guilt and the shame, as I understand it, all these years, is that if I was to forgive myself, that means I'm going to forget about my baby. So it's in the shame and the guilt that they go back to visit the grave, if I could say that. Like people who might um, just remember it, obsess about it, confess it 100 times, and keep and never feel forgiven. But by processing the loss, that's where I say you got to do at least a weekend, to really give yourself time and space and support to do the heavy lifting of grief work, and where you look at it all, and then put it in a spiritual process where you can feel cleansed of it all. We do similar with the grief to grace because people, as innocent as they are, they carry the shame of the abusers. They carry the secret of them many times. They protect the secret of the abuser. So especially with children, so you can have a lot of just tremendous amount of grief and anger that you've got to be able to put somewhere, because otherwise it's just swimming around as stress and cortisol and anxiety and many times depression. And these are the things that make us sick, right?
They say we're only as sick as our secrets, and I found
Yeah.
that rock exercise to be one of the most profound. And I remember I chose the biggest, heaviest rock, and then they said, "Okay, you got to keep this with you all weekend. You got to take it to the shower." And then it's like I said, "Oh, I'm never letting this rock go." And after about 24 hours, I was actually the first one to let it go because it was such a metaphor for like the grief and the shame and the guilt that I carried. And I'm like, I'm letting it go. And then you find a place in this beautiful place to release it, and it was just great. The whole weekend was great. You're great. I'm looking forward to meeting you in person. I think I'm going to go to this grief to grace thing because it
Oh,
can
good.
only help me. And I thank you so much for the work you do. I hope that the people that need this work will see this video or they will share it with people so that they don't have to go 25 years without healing from something that really can be healed.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, AJ.
Oh,
I really appreciate you.
oh,
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Burke. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. I'm going to grab a quick lunch and be back in a half hour with Dr. Matt Letterman, give you an update on my latest cat.